The U.S.-Canada relationship is tense due to new tariff policies, particularly in the energy and automotive sectors. This not only affects the two countries, but also has global implications, with competitors like BYD in Mexico rising in the electric vehicle market. The growing economic and diplomatic rift. The long-standing integration between the United States and Canada, defined by close economic ties, military cooperation, and mutual reliance, is increasingly under strain. For decades, the two nations have maintained a strong economic relationship, driven by significant cross-border trade, joint defense initiatives, and cooperation in key sectors such as energy, automotive, and technology. This economic partnership has been foundational to both countries, with Canada relying heavily on the U.S. market for exports, particularly in energy and raw materials. However, recent decisions by the U.S. government, especially the imposition of tariffs on energy and electricity imports from Canada, have raised tensions. These tariffs were introduced with the goal of protecting U.S. domestic industries, particularly in the energy sector. While the U.S. government views these tariffs as a necessary step to safeguard American jobs and industries, the impact on Canada has been severe, leading to trade disruptions, economic slowdowns, and a deterioration of diplomatic relations. Canada has voiced concerns that these tariffs not only hurt its economy, but also undermine decades of cooperative trade agreements and partnerships. Initially, there were hopes that relations between the two countries might improve, particularly after changes in leadership on both sides of the border. With a new administration in the U.S., there was optimism that diplomatic efforts could restore goodwill and ease tensions. However, the introduction of tariffs on the automotive industry, among other measures, has quickly reversed this hope. The automotive tariffs, which target Canadian-made vehicles and parts, have worsened the situation, causing significant disruptions in trade flows and deepening the divide between the two nations. These tariff decisions have caused serious challenges for ongoing trade negotiations and bilateral cooperation in critical sectors such as energy, technology, and defense. The friendly and mutually beneficial relationship that has defined U.S.-Canada relations for decades now faces increasing uncertainty. Both nations will need to reassess their economic and diplomatic strategies to navigate the evolving geopolitical landscape and ensure long-term stability in their interactions. Impact on the automotive industry. One of the most affected sectors by the new tariff policies is the automotive industry. The Trump administration has introduced new tariffs on foreign-made cars and parts with the intention of protecting domestic manufacturing jobs and boosting local production. The tariffs are projected to generate up to $100 billion annually for the U.S. government, under the assumption that higher costs for imported vehicles and parts will encourage U.S. automakers to increase production domestically. However, this policy has raised major concerns within the U.S. automotive industry, particularly among large automakers who depend on complex global supply chains. For decades, the industry has relied on parts and materials imported from countries like Canada, Mexico, and various Asian nations. Higher tariffs on imported components and vehicles could significantly increase production costs, which would likely lead to higher vehicle prices for consumers, reduced profit margins for manufacturers, and a slowdown in car sales. These repercussions have already been reflected in the stock market, where the shares of companies like General Motors, GM, and Ford have dropped significantly. On the other hand, certain companies, particularly electric vehicle, EV, manufacturers such as Tesla, have seen modest gains from the new tariffs. As the U.S. shifts its focus toward electric vehicle production, the increased tariffs on traditional gasoline-powered cars may provide a competitive advantage for EV producers that already manufacture locally, like Tesla. This shift could significantly alter the dynamics of the automotive market in the coming years, with long-term consequences for both traditional car manufacturers and emerging players in the EV sector. Canada's retaliation plans. In response to the U.S. tariffs, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney announced that Canada would impose retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods, potentially reaching up to $42 billion. Carney emphasized that the traditional trade relationship between the two nations has shifted. Canada can no longer accept unilateral actions from the U.S. that undermine their mutual economic interests. The long-standing reliance on the U.S. market is no longer viable, and Canada must rethink its economic strategies moving forward. The retaliatory tariffs will target a wide array of U.S. products, including agricultural goods, machinery, and consumer products. These measures are set to be implemented shortly after the new U.S. tariffs take effect on April 2nd, signaling Canada's firm stance against U.S. protectionism. This move highlights Canada's desire to protect its domestic industries and assert its economic independence, challenging what it views as unfair trade practices from the U.S. Furthermore, the tariffs signal a broader shift in Canada's trade priorities. Given the evolving global trade dynamics, Canada is expected to diversify its economic relationships. In particular, growing markets like China and India offer potential alternatives to the U.S. market. Strengthening ties with these emerging economies could provide Canada with new opportunities for growth and reduce its dependence on the U.S. By taking a more assertive approach to trade, Canada is signaling its willingness to stand up for its own economic interests. The success of these retaliatory measures will depend on how the U.S. responds and whether diplomatic negotiations can offer a path forward. Regardless of the outcome, Canada's actions reflect a changing economic landscape and the need for greater diversification in its trade strategy. Global reactions. The global community has expressed significant concern over the potential consequences of the U.S. tariffs, especially in terms of free trade principles and the stability of the global economy. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva criticized the U.S.'s protectionist policies, warning that such actions could severely damage the global trading system. Ursula von der Leyen, President of the European Commission, echoed similar concerns, cautioning that the tariffs could have a negative impact on international cooperation and global trade. In Europe, the German automotive industry, which has substantial exports to the U.S., has warned that the tariffs could hurt manufacturers worldwide, particularly those based in North America. Major German automakers such as Volkswagen, BMW, and Mercedes-Benz have factories in the U.S., and the tariffs will likely disrupt their supply chains and increase production costs. Moreover, the European Union has expressed frustration with the U.S.'s unilateral decision-making, which undermines multilateral trade agreements and international partnerships that have governed global trade for decades. Asian countries, particularly those with large automotive industries like Japan and South Korea, are also concerned about the long-term impact of these tariffs on their exports. As these nations rely heavily on the North American market, increased trade barriers could hurt their economies and disrupt the smooth flow of goods across international borders. The tariffs could potentially lead to higher prices for American consumers, as companies in the U.S. will face increased costs for imported goods, which will likely be passed on to consumers. The global repercussions of these tariff policies could be far-reaching, slowing down the worldwide economic recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic and creating challenges for developing countries that rely on stable trade relations with both the U.S. and other global partners. If the U.S. continues down this protectionist path, it could face increased isolation as other countries seek alternative trading partners and strengthen their own regional economic alliances. Tesla's struggles and benefits. Tesla, once hailed as a major disruptor in the automotive industry, has been facing financial challenges, with its growth slowing in key international markets. Despite the difficulties, Tesla is seen by some as a potential beneficiary of the U.S.'s new tariffs on non-U.S. made cars. The impositions of additional taxes on imported vehicles could provide some relief for Tesla by making imported gasoline-powered vehicles more expensive, potentially increasing the demand for electric vehicles, EVs, especially from domestic producers like Tesla. The tariffs are expected to provide a cushion for Tesla's domestic production in the U.S., allowing the company to capture more market share without facing as much competition from foreign car makers. However, Tesla's situation is far from straightforward. While the company may stand to benefit in the U.S. market, its performance in other regions, particularly in China and the European Union, has been disappointing. In China, which has been one of Tesla's most promising markets, sales have declined as local EV manufacturers ramp up production and improve their offerings. In the European Union, the growing competition from established automakers like Volkswagen and newer EV startups has put additional pressure on Tesla to maintain its market position. Additionally, Canada's response to the U.S. tariffs has complicated Tesla's operations in North America. The Canadian government has implemented punitive measures, including freezing incentives and rebates for Tesla vehicles. These moves have hindered Tesla's ability to compete effectively in the Canadian market, where the company had previously seen strong sales growth. As a result, Tesla faces a challenging road ahead, balancing the benefits from the tariffs in the U.S. with declining sales and political hurdles in key markets. The rise of Chinese EV makers. While Tesla struggles to maintain its position, Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers are quickly gaining ground, particularly in markets outside the US and Europe. Companies like BYD, which is often viewed as a major competitor to Tesla, have significantly outpaced the American automaker in global vehicle deliveries. In 2024, BYD surpassed Tesla in global deliveries, a remarkable achievement that underscores the shifting dynamics in the global EV market. BYD's success can be attributed to several factors. Firstly, the company's ability to produce affordable EVs has made it highly attractive to cost-conscious consumers, particularly in developing markets. In addition, BYD's aggressive pricing strategies have enabled it to offer vehicles at competitive prices, even in regions where Tesla has traditionally dominated. The company has also leveraged strong government support in China, which has helped it scale quickly and expand its presence internationally. What's particularly noteworthy is BYD's dominance in non-Western markets. In regions such as Asia, Africa, and South America, where Tesla has struggled to make a significant impact, BYD has made substantial inroads. The company's local manufacturing, supply chain efficiencies, and strong brand recognition in China have allowed it to gain a foothold in markets that Tesla has found challenging. As the demand for EVs continues to grow globally, BYD's position as a low-cost, high-volume producer puts it in a prime position to capture a large share of the international EV market. The Mexican electric vehicle landscape. As tensions between the U.S. and Canada continue to escalate, Mexico is positioning itself as a competitive force in the electric vehicle market. The country is increasingly seen as a strategic location for EV production due to its proximity to the U.S. and its efforts to attract foreign investment. One of the key projects in this space is the Olinea project, which aims to produce the first domestically designed and assembled electric vehicles in Mexico. This project is seen as a direct response to the growing influx of Chinese-made EVs, with Mexico hoping to establish itself as a hub for North American EV manufacturing. However, Mexico faces significant challenges in its bid to become a major player in the electric vehicle industry. One of the main obstacles is insufficient funding, which has hindered the development of key infrastructure necessary for the mass production of electric vehicles. Additionally, Mexico's lithium industry remains underdeveloped, despite the country having some of the world's largest lithium reserves. Lithium is a critical component for EV batteries, and the lack of an established lithium supply chain could limit Mexico's ability to compete with other nations that have access to more reliable and cost-effective sources of this key resource. Despite these challenges, Mexico is actively seeking to improve its position in the EV market. Government incentives, such as tax breaks and subsidies for EV manufacturers, are helping to attract foreign investment, and several major automakers are already considering establishing EV manufacturing plants in Mexico. If Mexico can overcome its current hurdles, it has the potential to become a key player in the North American EV market, offering a competitive alternative to both US and Chinese-made vehicles. A new era of economic tensions. The US-Canada trade relationship is undergoing a profound shift, with economic policies such as the imposition of tariffs reshaping the landscape for businesses and industries on both sides of the border. Canada's response to US tariffs will likely evolve as the situation unfolds, and other global players, such as BYD and Mexico, may capitalize on the changing dynamics in the electric vehicle market. While Tesla faces both opportunities and challenges from these economic shifts, Chinese EV manufacturers like BYD are solidifying their dominance in non-Western markets. At the same time, Mexico is positioning itself as a new competitor in the North American EV market, with the potential to disrupt existing production hubs. The future of the electric vehicle industry and global trade will depend on how these various players navigate the evolving geopolitical and economic landscape. Only time will tell how Canada will adjust its policies in response to the US tariffs, and how other countries like China and Mexico will position themselves in this increasingly complex global market.